Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of the Overlanding Podcast, the world's only dedicated podcast to vehicle-dependent travel, as far as we know at least. If anyone knows any different, please do let us know. You can email us here at aroundtheworldin800days@mail.com. The podcast is hosted by myself, Andy Smith, along with my wife, Emma Smart. Over the coming weeks, months and hopefully years, we'll be meeting the adventurous people who have chosen to travel the world by bicycle, motorcycle, car and truck. The format of the show will consist of 1 hour unedited informal chats. These may occasionally run longer than 1 hour. The aim of these chats is to discover what motivates people to embark on life-changing journeys, why people choose to travel in this manner, and to hear some incredible stories along the way. No doubt there'll be high drama, tales of amazing hospitality and enough anecdotes to keep you coming back for more. The first episode though is slightly different. Today I'll be chatting with my wife Emma. This lets you guys, the listeners, get to know us, the hosts, a little bit better, and you kind of have an understanding of where we're coming from. So, whether you are on the road or planning a trip of your own, hopefully you'll find this resource inspirational, entertaining and educational. So without further ado, please join us in one of the following locations. Around the campfire, relaxing on a beach, deep in a tropical jungle, atop a blustery mountain, or sat in a lush green valley next to a bubbling brook. We are recording. Hello.
Hello.
First things first, out of these 5 locations, where would you prefer this interview to take place? A, near a babbling brook in a lush green valley. B, in a little tent on a windy mountain. C, on a warm beach with the sea lapping at your feet. D, round a nighttime campfire in a forest. Or E, deep in a tropical jungle.
Ooh, jungle please.
Okay, jungle. Well, by the wonders of modern technology, we've just been transported into the jungle.
That may not be beneficial for you though, because if I see a butterfly or a lizard, I might have to suddenly dash off and identify it. So, okay. At your own risk, we're in the jungle.
Okay, well let's just take a second. Let's just take a second to appreciate the noise of the jungle. Nice.
Beautiful.
Okay, you are obviously my wife. And
I am.
I know the answers.
You are my husband.
And I know the answers to most of the questions I'm probably going to ask you. But for the benefit of our audience, we're going to run through this and I'm going to interview you today.
I might surprise you. You never know.
You might bust out something I don't know. Okay, just very briefly, could you just introduce yourself?
Okay, my name is Emma Smart. I am a wildlife ecologist and biologist. I became interested in overlanding when I joined a wildlife filming expedition back in, now I'm thinking 2003, I think, in the Middle East. And that's when my love of travelling in a vehicle, overland, camping, exploring, adventuring in that way began. So that's how I got into it, really.
Okay, but before that you'd been on quite a few adventurous trips prior to that, hadn't you? Yeah,
travel, I think, I believe quite strongly in the whole itchy feet phenomenon, for sure. I had a very adventurous grandfather, Bernard Davenport, and he had an idea that when each of his grandchildren turned 16, he would take them on an adventure. And fortunately for me, I'm the eldest, and he decided that he would take me to Nepal. We spent 3 weeks trekking 3 high valleys in the Himalaya, including up to base camp, and it literally changed my life forever, that trip. I was 16 years old, never been anywhere more exotic than, I think, Marbella at that point in my life, and it just absolutely blew me away. The culture, the people, how different it was, the nature, the landscape, the scenery. So that was my first sort of big adventure, and that set the ball rolling then, because I went back, I did my A-levels, but at the back of my mind travel was always there. I took a year out, I got my place at university to study marine biology, but then I took a year out and I travelled independently to India where I spent 7 months travelling and teaching English. And since then, travel has just been such a massive part of my life.
So from quite a young age, you'd kind of inherited your grandfather's adventurous spirit.
I think so. Whether it's a genetic thing, I'm not sure, but certainly his stories, and he's a very keen photographer. So slideshows of cycling tours across China and motorbike trips across the United States. I think that fascinated me from a very young age. So yeah, definitely there was a strong influence there.
And I never had the pleasure of meeting your grandfather because unfortunately he died before we kind of got together. But is there one specific thing about his character or one specific memory related to travel which really sticks in your mind, which to some degree has shaped you, maybe?
That's a good question. I think with my granddad, he would never say no. I think he was always open to every opportunity. He was incredibly friendly. Wherever he went, he met people and made friends. And I think if somebody said to him, "Would you like to come for dinner tonight?" he would say yes. If somebody said, "At the weekend, would you like to do a cycle trip up this mountain?" he would say yes. And I think that I've really taken from him, that if an opportunity arises, say yes. You know, say yes to things in life that come up, however big or small, obviously within reason. That's not advice you would follow for everything. But I think, yeah, his openness and to opportunities, I think I've taken that from him, and that was a really valuable lesson.
One thing that really stands out in my mind, actually, which you repeat frequently, is his ethos that beer is as good as water. So if you're dehydrated,
oh, right, yeah.
what did he used to say? What's his phrase?
I can't remember exactly. I think it stems from Victorian times, doesn't it? When poor people drank beer because it was cheaper, and they survived the Black Death, I think. Because so yeah.
Well, that's something we've probably adapted and adopted.
We sample the beers in each country, that's for sure. I think he would be proud of that one.
So skipping forward a little, let's just very briefly talk about your time in the Middle East. You worked on a documentary series.
Yeah, it was. In the UK, I was studying marine biology, and I was quite heavily involved in fish conservation. And through a contact at Chester Zoo, actually, they'd heard about this crazy guy out in the Middle East, an independent filmmaker who wanted to make the region's first wildlife documentary series. And as well as filming wildlife, he wanted to use it as a platform for scientists and researchers to travel with him and explore some of the areas of the world that have been overlooked, really. I mean, I think you see a lot of documentaries about Africa and the rainforest, but Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, is quite overlooked. So he wanted to make a film but also take scientists with him, and he was looking for someone interested in freshwater fish, particularly because Arabia is a desert region, there's not much fresh water. It's quite an unusual story. So that's how I got involved with that project, really, going out to the Middle East initially for a period of 3 months to go to Oman, and that 3 months actually turned into 9 years I spent in the Middle East.
And due to the fact that you're an incredibly organised person, as I obviously know, your role...
My clipboard is never far away. I can actually touch it from here.
Your role within that team kind of grew, didn't it? And rather than just being the wildlife fish expert, you then took on the role of having to organise the team because it was a small team and they weren't very organised. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say that was spot on.
And then, as part of that, you travelled into Saudi Arabia and Yemen, also in Jordan. Is that correct?
Yeah, the first phase of the filming expedition was through the United Arab Emirates and Oman, and then I got on very well with Jonathan, the director, and he took me on as the production manager, having absolutely no background in television production at all. I was just simply quite organised. And I then planned the logistics for our next phase, which covered Saudi Arabia, Yemen and Jordan. Put the team together It was a big project. We were on the road for 5 months, so that was my first taste of expedition planning, and I just basically was winging it. Never done it before.
And how did you find being in Saudi Arabia? Obviously, being quite tall and blonde. Yeah.
I was actually the first single woman to ever be granted a visa for Saudi Arabia, because I was travelling without my husband, father or brother, which is actually illegal, unbelievably, in Saudi Arabia. They couldn't believe it at the embassy that I even got the visa to go, so it was quite a monumentous trip, really. I found it fascinating. I found it very difficult, just to see the life of some of the people in Saudi Arabia. But overall, an incredible experience, and my love for that kind of travel just grew as we travelled across the whole of Saudi, all the way up into Jordan and back again. So yeah, it was an interesting time, and being a woman in Saudi Arabia and having by law to cover completely in sort of black abaya and the hijab was.
And what year was this?
Crikey, I think that was in I can't remember.
Early 2000s.
Yeah, mid 2000s. Yeah.
And that was. And you were travelling by 4x4 on that expedition?
Yeah.
And how many vehicles did you have?
We had 3 vehicles. We were travelling in jeeps, and we were a team of 6, and that varied between the director, production manager, myself, cameramen, diving specialist, because we did a lot of underwater filming. So we were a very small team. It was quite an ambitious small project. It was very difficult. I mean, if you think of Attenborough and one of the series he might make, they spend years in the making, and we were a small team with a very limited budget and time span. So I was incredibly proud of what we produced.
And was that your first experience of off-road driving?
Yes, definitely. I was literally thrown in the deep end. I was like, this is a 4x4 car. Obviously, you sit on it would be left-hand drive, automatic Jeep in the desert. Off you go. Oh, and you've got a trailer as well, full of heavy equipment. So it was sink or swim, really.
And how often did you sink?
A few times. Not too. I wasn't too bad, actually. But I learned how to dig a car out of the sand pretty quick too.
Yeah. Okay, so let's skip forward a few years. We obviously met way back in 2001, and
just before I left for the
just
Middle
before
East.
you left for the Middle East. And then we kept in contact over the years, and it wasn't until 2010 that we actually met up again. And on that trip, I came out to visit you in the Middle East, and we carried out a road trip through the UAE, down to Oman, down to Salalah, right up to the Yemen border.
Yeah, beautiful part of the world.
Absolutely stunning. And that, for me, actually changed my whole perspective about what was important in life. And actually, always having had a massive love for cars, it kind of opened my eyes to a new way of travelling, which I hadn't really thought about. When I was younger, I always had dreams of road trips, about driving coast to coast across the US or something like that, but never really involving an off-road aspect. And so for me, that trip we took just kind of gave me a whole new perspective on what was potentially out there.
Yeah.
So that was a holiday, and then we came back.
I don't know if it was a holiday.
It
was an experience.
I came back to the UK, and then we kind of kept in touch. Just talk briefly about the inception of our trip. How did that come about? Our 800 days around the world trip.
I think I had been, up until that point, working in wildlife conservation, and I had unfortunately become quite disillusioned with that. I think a combination of working in a region of the world that was incredibly difficult when it comes to conservation, I did become quite disillusioned with it. I was working in academia also, which I've never been a huge fan of. I'm a very hands-on field person, and I kind of, something switched in my brain that said, I've spent 10 years of my life trying to save the world, now I want to see it. And I think after our trip down to Oman, the two of us, and we got on so well. I mean, it was only a 2-week trip, something like that. It was a really short trip. And sort of my jobs, and I'd been in the Middle East a long time. By that time, it was 9 years. I was sort of ready to move on, and I think that was the kind of what sort of triggered the idea. Really, it was like, where do we go next? Where can we drive next?
Okay, and so what did we decide?
Around the world. Why not? Aim big.
I think it came up after quite a blasé comment during a Skype conversation, and neither of us. Well, both of us want to take credit for it, and neither of us actually know whose idea it actually was. But that kind of trip, for a long time within the planning, it kind of seemed so far off and unreachable. And as far as planning the trip, what kind of things did we do to prepare?
I think we first moved ourselves so we lived on the same continent. That was the first, wasn't it? Because I was still living out in the United Arab Emirates and you were back in Guernsey. So we made the big decision that I moved. I left what had been my home for 9 years, which was a huge upheaval for me. I loved my life there. All my friends were there. And moved to Guernsey. So that was the first step, wasn't it? Then we bought the car pretty much next. So we had the vehicle. And it's an incredibly daunting task, and I think it's actually a full-time job in itself to plan a round the world trip. There is so much involved in terms of the planning and the logistics, but also you need the money to do it. So we found ourselves both working 2 jobs 7 days a week, so we didn't really have the time to plan. So it was an 18 months that was a whirlwind, really, wasn't it? It was hard work. It was stressful. Fortunately, we never lost sight of that dream. So that was our incentive and our motivation to keep going. But it was certainly a very, very difficult part, I think, of my life, that.
And we had a relatively small budget, which also dictated the kind of vehicle we could buy.
Which we bought off eBay.
eBay
was from eBay.
And just to fill in the audience on our particular vehicle and why we have that vehicle, we have a Toyota Hilux Surf. It's 22 years old, and the reason we chose it, well, actually the vehicle chose us rather than we chose the vehicle. It wasn't our number one choice. Ideally we wanted a 70 series Land Cruiser. They were just so far out of our price range that was never going to be an option. A Land Rover Defender I always had a soft spot for, but we had heard such bad reports about availability of spares that they were really difficult to work on. So despite having a soft spot for them, we decided that was... and actually it was also out of our price range. And so we were limited by very few vehicles which would actually be suitable for the job. The Hilux Surf was one of them. So it kind of chose us in a way. But the car has actually been absolutely amazing.
Well, she's still going.
She's still going throughout the duration of our trip. And obviously we've had problems like most people do. But the availability of spares worldwide is particularly wholesome. So it's incredibly easy to find car parts when we're on the road. So that's the reason we have our car. And we love her.
Yes, our BB.
Our BB. And so before that, you out in the Middle East, when you were living out there, you also had a 4x4 yourself?
Yes, I had a Nissan Xterra.
A Nissan Xterra.
Yeah.
So were you doing much off-road driving? Did you used to go and play out in the desert?
Yeah, I think lifestyle in Dubai, and then later on when I moved to other Emirates, the climate is so fantastic. You spend a lot of time outdoors, and a lot of people who live there spend time camping and in the desert. So I was always out in the desert. I had 2 dogs, so I was always out driving off-road. My final job was actually in the middle of the desert, so to get to my house I had to drive off-road to even get there. So off-road driving had become a big part of my life, and I loved it.
So that kind of set the scene, really, and our trip to Oman really dictated to us what we wanted to do with our lives, didn't it? It was like we didn't want to go in a normal camper van. We wanted to undertake our next trip in an off-road vehicle so we could get out to the beautiful places and up mountains and into the deserts.
Yeah, I think when choosing a vehicle, it's a trade-off, isn't it? You know, a smaller, lighter 4x4 vehicle like we have, you're much more able to get into the tiny little mountain tracks, but obviously we're limited with space and we can't carry as much equipment as some of these big all singing, all dancing trucks, but then they're limited in other ways. So I think there's always a trade-off when it comes to vehicle choice.
In between
and
luxury,
we couldn't afford anything.
Okay, so we planned our trip. We saved up some money.
We did. It was a full-on 18 months.
And we had quite a unique... Often people ask us about how we fund our trip. And basically we sold pretty much everything we owned. And did it the old-fashioned way where we worked 2 jobs, saved up our money, worked hard. But we also had, I think, quite a unique incentive for saving money, which was the Adventure Mile. Can you tell us a little bit about the Adventure Mile? Because I think other people who are planning a trip will also find it useful.
It's difficult to put a cost on something like this as well when you're planning it. Like, how much money do you need to save? And it's also difficult to find a cut-off because you can always, let's work another month, let's earn another 1,000, you know. So you have to find a point where it's like, okay, we reach this, then we go. And for us, one of the ways that helped motivate us and an incentive was we developed the Adventure Mile, and we looked at how many miles roughly we would cover, and then we looked at the average cost of fuel, diesel across those countries, and we worked out, then we added in some other costs, food and visas and some of the major costs, and we worked out that approximately it would cost us 25 pence a mile to travel. And once we had that figure, then everything we did could be broken down into Adventure Miles, literally to the point that you're in a shop and you're going to buy a Mars bar and you're like, that's 3 Adventure Miles, that's a lot, okay, don't buy it. Should we go down the pub? Or should we have a quick pint after work? No, because that's so many Adventure Miles. And it was a really, really good way, and we became very, very good at saving money, not spending money. And once you stop buying stuff, you realise that you don't actually need, because I think before that both of us had lived quite, not particularly extravagant lifestyles, but we certainly bought things when we wanted them, didn't we? And we went from that to literally spending nothing, and everything we had went into saving for our trip. So it was a huge
and selling your possessions is an incredibly liberating
it's hard
experience.
At first, it's really difficult.
It's very difficult
but once you start doing it, it feels really good, and getting rid of stuff, and I think that's something that a lot of people should do, even if irregardless of the incentive of, you know, a trip or buying something. Just getting rid of stuff and simplifying your life in terms of your material possessions is incredibly therapeutic, and the more you do it, the better you get at it and the easier it is. And I think even now, and we're 4 years on, aren't we, from that point? 5 years on almost.
5 years on, yeah.
And we still have that mentality of just not buying stuff that we don't need and just being careful with money. I think, anyway, I hope we always have that now.
A life lesson.
Yeah.
Okay, so also when we're on the road, we have a few tricks up our sleeve which also help prolong the travelling and saving money. And also, they not only do they have the benefits of saving money, but they also have the benefits of being introduced to a new country. So can we just talk a little bit about workaway.info?
Yeah, Workaway is something we stumbled upon by accident, and it's basically a work exchange project that's run through a website online. You subscribe to it, but it's really minimal, I think like 10 or 15 euros a year. So you have a profile where there are photos of you and your skills, and then across the globe there are hosts who will take in workawayers, volunteers, for a period of a week, 2 weeks, a month, 6 months. And the basic exchange is that you give 4 to 5 hours a day, 25 hours a week work to them, and in return they give you food and accommodation. So no money exchanges hands, which a lot of people are surprised. They think we must work along the way as we travel, but to not spend money is as valuable as earning money. So for us, if we stop for 2 weeks somewhere on a workaway project and don't spend anything, that's really, really valuable to us. It saves us so much money and ultimately extends the amount of time we're able to travel. The workaways that we've done so far, we did a photography project in Montenegro, we worked on a permaculture project in Croatia, we worked designing restaurant menus and setting up a hostel and a restaurant in the Pyrenees. Gosh, what else have we done? In Greece, we helped out landscaping and looking after animals.
But also, not only is the work exchange valuable in helping us save money, it's also a great way to be introduced to the country, because often you're staying with a local person who can give you incredible insight about the country.
And they are generally families, they're not companies, it's quite a small scale. For example, we did one in Hungary where we were restoring an old mansion, and we lived in this tiny little village that normally we would have driven through, but because we were there for a couple of weeks, we got to know the villagers, and we'd be out in the local bar drinking the rakia, and it was great. And I think it's a really nice introduction to a country, and you get to know some locals, and you can ask those questions that sort of bug you as you're driving around, and get a real insight into the country. So I think I would definitely recommend that, not just for long-term travellers. I mean, you could make an entire trip just by doing these workaway projects. They're wonderful, and learning new skills also. I mean, I can now milk a goat. What can you do that you couldn't do before?
All kinds of things. We certainly took on a lot of building projects. You can use
a scythe.
Yeah, we took on a lot of building projects, which is very useful for the future.
You can make Croatian paprika chutney.
So that's workaway.info. That's another one of our little tips to help prolong your travels as you're on the road. Okay, so let's just go back to our trip then. So we'd done all the planning, we'd incentivised our saving, we'd saved up enough money, and then we finally left. So can you just run us very quickly through the route we took?
Yeah, we eventually set sail in June 2012. We were waiting for our Russian visa. We got a business visa, 3 months, which is the time that we needed to get across Russia into Mongolia and back into Russia to cross into Kazakhstan. So once that stamp was in our passport, we literally left. We travelled up through, we sailed across to Belgium, Holland, into Denmark, across to Norway, Sweden and Finland. So we went quite quickly through Scandinavia because it's expensive, and also it's somewhere in the future we'll be able to travel to relatively easily. So we entered Russia after a couple of weeks in Europe, I think. Yeah. Drove.
And just actually, it just reminded me of something. Can we just talk about the story of how we crossed into Russia and the campsite?
Yeah, we stayed in a really lovely campsite in Finland, and it was on a lake and a pine forest, and it had these beautiful private pine chalets where you could have a sauna and then run naked and jump into these glacial lakes. And it was beautiful. But round the campfire one evening, we met some local people who travelled in Russia frequently, and just put the fear of God into us, didn't they?
We were already quite nervous about crossing the border, as Russia was such an alien country to us.
And we just out overlanding, so everything was new, our equipment, everything was just so new, so it was already daunting anyway, and we really threw ourselves in the deep end by travelling to Russia first, I think.
So, and what did the Finnish fellow around the campfire say?
I think he basically said if we weren't mugged, robbed at knife point, we'd be eaten by bears.
He did actually say we would be robbed at gunpoint, which kind of didn't fill us with confidence, did it?
So we stayed another night in the campsite actually after that, didn't we?
And then what actually happened when we got to Russia?
I think we drove for a week and just saw trees. I Actually, Russia, it was very daunting. Russia's strange because it's so similar, but so alien at the same time. Like, people look the same as you. So it feels European, but it's so alien in other ways, and it's so huge. And we would literally drive for several days, then we would look at a map, and it would be like the distance of your small finger you'd covered on this map. It's just huge. So we spent, I think, it took us 6 weeks. We crossed 2 months to get to Mongolia, across Russia, and we were quite keen. Having the car and travelling the way we do, we decided that we would avoid, for example, Moscow and St. Petersburg, because in the future, again, they would be places that we could visit relatively easy and without the car. So we were much more keen to get out into the sticks and into rural parts of countries, particularly wilderness areas. Being a biologist and very keen on nature, that was more my incentive to get to forests and some of the wild places. So
and as far as preconceptions go about Russia, did it fulfill your preconceptions, or did it smash them? Was it what you were expecting?
The landscape was bizarre. It was a lot of swamp, a lot of forest. It was sometimes in the rural villages, it was like going back in time. There were people ploughing fields with oxen and women with headscarves on, bouncing like babies in an old sort of 1950s buggy along a cobbled street. Like it really, I didn't think it would be like that at all. I think I was more the sort of fur coat wearing Russians. I don't know. I don't think we actually did enough research.
Well,
I think we were so busy working and earning money and just planning the logistics that we didn't actually read a huge amount. And in some ways, I think that's a good thing, because you go into a country with actually not massive preconceptions and prejudgments.
Yeah.
You're more of an open mind, and I think that was good. In hindsight, that's good. I do see other people who travel who literally have read every. I mean, I hadn't even read another Overlander's blog. I don't even think I knew it was called Overlanding until sometime mid-Russia. We just, I think we were quite naive. Actually.
There was definitely a certain level of naivety to it, to the point where I knew I was going to Russia, so I'd purchased a hat with furry earmuffs, and it wasn't until we got there that we realised we were in the middle of summer and it was a heat wave and it was 38 degrees pretty much every day.
Yeah, Siberia had a heat wave. It was one of the hottest conditions we've ever had travelling in.
And so that kind of naivety it's kind of awe-inspiring, because you learn an incredible amount as you travel. Fast. And I don't know, I guess it kind of leads to the question, can you over-prep for trips like this? If you prepare too much, does it take all the mystic and wonder out of it when you actually get there?
Yeah, I think it can. I think it does. I think you've got to find that balance, because as you're driving through a town, if there's some incredible Kremlin or cathedral, you don't want to miss it. So do enough research for the sites, but don't do too much, because I think leave a lot to spontaneity, definitely. I mean, you have to be flexible and spontaneous with this kind of travel anyway. But I don't regret being as unprepared as we were, because I think that naivety and that openness is quite a nice way to enter a country, really.
Yeah.
And just, so I think you can over-prepare, definitely.
Okay, and then from Russia we travelled into Mongolia.
Yeah, from Russia we crossed into Mongolia.
Which actually fulfilled all my expectations of what I was expecting, because literally from the border onwards, you drive 1 mile into Mongolia and it is the stereotypical image of what you expect Mongolia to be. The change is really quite dramatic on the border. So Mongolia for you was also quite interesting, because it was one place that your grandfather had visited prior to us actually visiting, and just to bring it back to your granddad, he was just such an incredible traveller, even right up until the point just before he died, right? He was still undertaking quite hefty trips, right?
Yeah, I mean, he died of lung cancer, and so it got to a certain point where he wasn't able to fly, and so he just took the train instead. So he got into train journeys, and the Trans-Siberian Express was one of his last sort of big journeys that he took. So he went all through Mongolia. So I actually had his guidebook and his maps that he used when he was there, which was really lovely. Sort of followed in his footsteps a little bit. But Mongolia surpassed all expectations. It was just incredible. It was so unspoiled. It was pristine. It really was like going back in time. People were living there as they had for hundreds of years, in terms of the nomads and
I'm sure many of our listeners have also travelled through Mongolia. It's up there with kind of Morocco as one of the go-to destinations that all overlanders kind of feel they have to kind of achieve, and there's certainly a very good reason for that. The driving is absolutely incredible. When we visited in 2012, the Chinese were investing a lot of money into Mongolia and started building roads. So I'm not sure now. I haven't spoken to anyone who's travelled through there recently, so I'm not sure if the road network is completed or not, or if it's still possible. Certainly when we were there, it was impossible to travel across.
It was a few several hundred kilometres of tarmac in the entire country, wasn't it?
Yeah. And I'm not sure now if that road network has been completed, because when we were there, you couldn't cross the entirety of the country by
I think the tarmac just went east and west out of Ulaanbaatar a little, and then you were just literally driving in the dust, which was part of its charm. I mean, I'm sure the developing infrastructure will help the people of Mongolia. It's a double-edged sword sometimes.
Certainly one thing I remember from Mongolia, which will always stick with me, is we had got a GPS track from another overlander in Ulaanbaatar, and he said, go on this drive, it's a great drive. So we kind of took his GPS track and we headed off, and then we were following the GPS track, but little did we know that it had rained ridiculously heavily between when he had driven it and when we were driving it, and eventually we came to a very small village and had to drive through a river which was like over windscreen deep and raging, and unfortunately we had to turn back, and it was a 2-day drive. So that was just one example of how you can kind of end up in these kind of interesting scenarios, but we ended up getting stuck in the village because it was so ridiculously muddy.
Conditions changed so rapidly, didn't they, in Mongolia? The weather, one minute would be sunny, then clouds would come, then it would thunder, then it would be rain, then it would be glorious sunshine. It was really wild, really, really wild country.
Okay, and it was also in Mongolia that our kind of initial dream, we had some awakening news that our dream was going to come to a very abrupt end for the time being, wasn't it?
Just 3 months. We were 3 months in.
Yeah, 3 months into our dream trip, we received news that both my parents had been diagnosed with cancer, and it was at that point that we had no choice really but to kind of drive home. So we undertook the drive back from Mongolia to the UK. While our visa still allowed us. Luckily, we had a double entry Russian visa which allowed us to get back into Russia. And we drove back to the UK in 2 weeks. That was fun, wasn't it?
It was awful. I think the combination of the news we'd received and what we were going home to, but also the fact that our dream potentially was over, and then just the sheer exhaustion of travelling 12-hour days non-stop. When we planned the route from Mongolia back to the UK, we actually had to take the curvature of the earth into account because the distance was that great. It was unreal. A journey I would never, ever, ever wish to repeat.
But
one.
But if anyone's listening, it is possible to drive to Mongolia from the UK in 2 weeks.
It's just not particularly enjoyable.
Yeah, it's not particularly enjoyable though. So we headed back to the UK. And then from there, we waited around. My parents' treatments were going well, so we formulated another plan to head down to Morocco. with a no commitments plan. If we wanted to come back, we could. So we went down and we enjoyed Morocco. Then we came home again. Unfortunately, my mum passed away. Emma and I got married before my mum passed away.
Not in that order.
Not in that order. And then we decided...
Yeah, it was family time.
Yeah.
I think no matter how much you plan these trips, ultimately your main priority is your family back home, and you cannot ever foresee what will happen when you're away, and it's just something that you deal with as and when at the time. And we made the right decision, and we were there for our family when they needed us, and it left us in limbo for a period of time, didn't it? But we never lost sight of the dream.
So we headed out again.
So we went about. We went again. Third time.
And this time we wanted to pick up our original route in Kazakhstan, which is where we would have visited next after Mongolia. So we headed down through Europe, through Southeast Europe, through Greece and Turkey, up through Georgia and Armenia.
By this time it was
Russia.
August 2014. So 2 years after we'd originally left. Yeah.
And then we arrived back in Kazakhstan. And how was Kazakhstan and all of Central Asia?
Well, we skipped through the Europe part.
We skipped through Europe pretty quickly. I'm just aware that time is ticking. So
I found crossing into Kazakhstan incredibly emotional. I think because that was the point at which we had kind of abandoned our trip 2 years earlier, and to have actually been through everything that we'd been through and to still have come back and made it was so overwhelming and felt like such an achievement that we kind of stuck at it. And I absolutely adored Kazakhstan. It still is one of my favourite countries. The wilderness, the sheer scale of the country, the wildlife, the barrenness, which in itself I think is completely stunning and breathtaking. A huge horizon of steppe in every direction with wild horses galloping across them and eagles flying in the sky above Kazakhstan is truly beautiful, and I think very few people actually travel there. I think overlanding is certainly one of the only ways you can, I think, logistically see
most of the country.
Most of the country.
And then certainly the wildlife throughout the whole of Central Asia is absolutely stunning, and the scenery. From Kazakhstan we headed down through Central Asia and we drove the Pamir Highway, which for me was a highlight. You know, many overlanders have a holy grail, you know, some want to drive the Bolivian Death Road, others want to go up to Siberia, drive the Road of Bones. For me in particular, the Pamir Highway had been on top of my list for a long time, and it certainly was as wild as we imagined it was going to be. And the reports we'd read, you know, about political unrest, about how just wild the area is, you know, earthquakes are frequent, flooding is frequent, avalanches, landslides, all kinds of things. And we certainly experienced all of that in our time travelling the Pamir Highway.
You feel like you're on the roof of the world, and you, for me, loving the natural world and wilderness, you just really felt the power of the earth there. It was just so incredibly beautiful. There were no people. You could look in every direction and you wouldn't see a house, an electricity pylon, a person, anything. It was just so incredibly stunning. Absolutely loved it.
And our time there, we were there in the summer, but the temperature rarely rose above 6 degrees, right?
Yeah,
it was still pretty cold in the summer, just due to the altitude.
4,500 metres?
Yeah, 4,655 metres, I think, is the highest pass.
Yeah. The car nearly gave up on us.
Yeah.
We had to park slightly at a downhill angle.
At that kind of altitude, if you've never driven at that kind of altitude, it can play havoc with the car. Our car lost a lot of power, and it would smoke a ridiculously large amount, to the point where we had power loss, where we had to park facing downhill, just to get some momentum before the car would warm up. So that was interesting, and again, naivety. We kind of learnt these things as we went. So we travelled through Central Asia. That was amazing. Into Iran. What happened in Iran?
Iran. If I was to sum up our time in Iran, one of the most incredible countries we've visited. Certainly in terms of people, hospitality, warmth, and welcome. Absolutely amazing. Unfortunately, our time was spoilt somewhat because we were robbed while we were there. We were involved in a project to make a film which just didn't turn out right. I don't think Iran or the government were ready for British people with video cameras, two things that they particularly have a strong dislike to, and there was a series of unfortunate events that I don't think we'll go into too much, but that marred our visit somewhat. But from those negative incidents, we made such incredible friends. So many people came forward to help us, offers of help from complete strangers, that I think Iran, the memories and the friends we made in Iran will stay with us forever. It was incredible. A country that I really would recommend people visit for sure. For us, it was an experience. Yeah. Definitely an experience.
I think we
not the one we planned.
No, but we certainly got to see a side of the country that I think most visitors and foreigners probably don't get to see.
Yeah, and so it wasn't the beautiful blue mosaic domed mosques and ancient cities that we saw in Iran, but what we did see was the real Iran and the life that the people live there, and the political system, and in a way that is as interesting, if not more interesting, and certainly a very realistic, gritty, genuine view of life in Iran as it is at the moment. So an experience, definitely.
Okay, and then from Iran...
we shipped to India, my favourite country in the world. Completely mad. Absolutely love India. So eccentric. Such an assault on the senses. Every colour, sound, smell. It's just incredible. I know it's a country that a lot of overlanders skip through quickly because of the challenges faced by travelling overland there, but I loved it. We spent 4.5 months. Very long months there, didn't we?
Yeah. And
I travelled a lot in India before, so I knew what to expect. But for you, that was your first trip. So,
yeah,
what did you think?
It was I think India's the Marmite of countries. You either love it or you hate it, and it's for me. I found it incredibly fascinating. The culture is incredible, and it's unlike any other country. But I did find it quite claustrophobic at times, purely because the people have no concept of private space, or and that can be very difficult, especially if you're living outdoors and living in your car. You know, you'd stop the car for 5 minutes, and before you know it, there's 40 people stood around in a circle staring at you. And I think that takes a lot of getting used to.
Yeah, if you kind of leave your normal overlanding lifestyle at the border and then pick it up again when you cross to Myanmar, I think you can deal with India. You have to have a completely different mindset when overlanding in India, but it is absolutely worthwhile. It really is an incredible country, and like you say, absolutely unique.
Okay, we're kind of getting to our last few countries, but just to wrap it up a little bit, because I don't want to run on too late.
So now we're really in the jungle, right?
Now we're really in the jungle.
Asia.
Southeast Asia. We travelled through Southeast Asia. Again, these countries all had their various challenges, but could you just run me through like a typical day? For example, in Thailand, what would we do on a typical day in Thailand?
Generally, obviously, we sleep in the roof tent. We tend to sleep with the sun and the sunrise, so we were up quite early. Generally, I get up a bit earlier and I'm out with my binoculars, bird spotting and jotting, which I absolutely adore. And Southeast Asia was paradise for me completely. We never rush. Generally, we don't leave our campsites until around midday, do we? We sit, have a cup of tea. Always kettle goes on first. have a little mooch around, have some breakfast. There's always jobs to do, maintenance on the car, a bit of cleaning, something needing fixing. We invest quite a lot of time in our blog and our Facebook page and photography, so there's always jobs related to that. Pack up. Generally we try and aim to drive a maximum of 2 or 3 hours a day. That's it. So despite being a driving around the world expedition, driving is the smaller part of our time that we spend. We explore places on the way. Sometimes they're places that we've read about in guidebooks or had advice from other travellers or tourists or locals. And then 4:30, we tend to look for a camp spot for the evening. Sundown is essential. A local beer, watch the sunset, get some dinner on the go, relax, and into the tent.
So that's a typical day.
I would say, yes.
Okay, so overall, how many days will we be on the road?
In total,
Yeah.
over all 3 phases, 858. So we surpassed our Around the World in 800 Days original title.
Despite not actually
We
circumnavigating
didn't
the world.
circumnavigate, but I think the word around has some artistic license to it, because we certainly travelled around the world in 800 days. We didn't go around the world. There's a big difference between those two. Certainly if you look at our route, it's a very squiggly red line.
Okay, and just to start wrapping it up a little bit, favourite countries, very, very quickly?
India is still up there for me. I think Central Asia, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, just for their sheer natural beauty and wilderness, and India just for the culture and sheer craziness. I think they are my favourite countries.
Okay, and as far as kind of you, what have you learnt about yourself over the last 5 years?
I have learnt that I am much happier living a simpler life, that my life does not have to be based on a career or anything monetary or acquisition of material goods or promotions and jobs and things like that, which previously it had. My life now is based on doing what makes me happy, and that wasn't the case before. I was happy in my work and I was happy in what I was doing, but I think through travel and through living so simply and through the experiences we've had, I know that there is another life out there. And also I think rules. I think when you're younger, there's this kind of unwritten set of rules in life that say, okay, you go to school, you get your GCSEs, you get your A-levels, you go to university, or you train, or you get a job or whatever, and you get your job. Then if you're lucky, you meet your dream partner, maybe you get married, buy a house, get your job promotion, maybe you have children.
Did you meet your dream partner?
I would hope so. I think after 4 years living like less than a metre apart, I think that's a pretty good test, isn't it, for a relationship? But
and that's one area I really wanted to talk to him. We haven't touched on, so maybe we'll save that for another podcast at some point.
But I just think with these unwritten rules in life, there actually are no rules in life. And if you have a dream, or if there's something you want to do, and it doesn't have to be something as extreme as driving around the world, I really think people should follow their dreams, and I really think people should do what makes them happy, and not necessarily bow to these unwritten rules of society that says you have to do this, and you have to do this at this time of your life, and you don't, because you only have one life. So I think it's very important to live it in a way that makes you happy.
Okay, and then as far as being an overlander is concerned, what traits do you think you need to be a good overlander?
Flexibility, absolutely. Things change all the time. Situations can become stressful. Situations change. I think as much as you plan, things are always going to change. So being flexible is very important. Being open, like I said earlier about my granddad, being open to opportunity and taking those opportunities when they come along. Organised, I think to a degree you do need to be organised. As much as being spontaneous is great, you do need to know that what you need.
To to get into a
visa-wise
country.
to get into the next country. And an openness to meet people and try new things. I would say they were the main attributes. Flexibility and openness.
So
organised.
Would you say you were... This is a very open question, but would you say you were a completely different person to when you left 5 years ago? Has the change in your life been that profound that it's obviously noticeable to you?
What drives me, my passion, is still wildlife and nature, and that was the same before I left for this trip, and it's the same now. I think I've just been fortunate enough to make it a bigger part of my everyday life through travel. I think in other areas of my life I've definitely changed a lot in terms of ambition and drive and what makes me happy, and the way in which I want to live my life. That has definitely changed significantly.
Okay, good. And just one final thing. If people want to learn more about us, where can they go?
If after that you're still interested, we do have a website which is aroundtheworldin800days.com. We are on Facebook. We make a lot of very amateurish but quite fun short films that you can find on YouTube. We have a Twitter account. I think if you Google Around the World in 800 Days, all of those things will pop up somewhere.
And there are
online.
also links from our website to all of those.
We have tons of photographs, so if you are travelling in any of the countries we've been through, have a little look at our photo albums on Facebook. We make quite an effort to write descriptions of photos and where we've been, so I think our website also we hope can be a resource for other travellers. There's lots of information now on there about visas and border crossings. Obviously it changes, but
so what does the future hold?
Well, we were never tough enough on ourselves to make a set concrete decision, so we arrived back about 3 months ago back to the UK, and with the thought that maybe we would work towards settling down a little, or maybe we would work towards travelling again. So we're going travelling again. I think we're both in a position in our life where our commitments are low in terms of we don't have children, we don't have a mortgage, we don't have set careers, or actually we still don't have jobs. We should probably work on that one. And so we're in a good position. Our car, although she needs a lot of TLC, it's good to go another continent, I think. So we have now set our sights west and the Americas. So that's our next plan, isn't it?
Good. Okay, well I think that's a good point to call it a day.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
You'd think that all that time in the car we wouldn't have anything else to talk about still, but obviously we do. And what a lovely jungle.
Well, that was the first episode of the Overlanding Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. We think it went well. We'd love to hear what you thought about it, so please find us on Facebook /the Overlanding Podcast. Be sure to subscribe and review us on iTunes, and please check out our website, theoverlandingpodcast.com. This is obviously a new endeavour. If you like what you've heard, please share it with your friends and help spread the word. Over the coming weeks, we've got some amazing interviews lined up with bicycle, motorbike, car and truck-based overlanders. The plan at the moment is to upload one a week, so please keep checking back for updates or subscribe in iTunes. If you're an overlander yourself and have an interesting story, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at aroundtheworldin800days@mail.com with the subject heading podcast interview. Okay, that's it for now. Goodbye, and don't forget, adventure awaits.